You know, I never fully understood why human sacrifice is seen as such a barbaric and depraved practice committed by savages. I mean, I get why the whole killing thing is frowned upon. That doesn't need any further explanation. But the notion that such rituals were performed by uncultured and uncivilized peoples, I find that truly disgusting. Because human sacrifice is much more prominent in history than most people know. And yet, whenever you hear the term human sacrifice, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Because I'd wager it's something along the lines of this. Yeah, ancient Native American rituals are most commonly associated with the practice, especially the Aztecs. And you know what? That's not fair. Most people have such a limited understanding on why these ritual sacrifices were practiced, and to focus on just one particular culture, it's just short-sighted. So that's what this video is going to be about. I want to look at some of the other groups that practiced human sacrifice and why they did it in the first place. Now, I feel that it's only appropriate to start with the Aztecs, as not only are they the most well-known purveyors of human sacrifice, but they tend to have a bad reputation because of it. So let's try and fix that. You see, in Aztec mythology, their gods had sacrificed themselves in order for mankind to live and become prosperous. Thus, a central aspect of their beliefs was continuing this cycle of sacrifice to the gods in order for them to sustain the universe. This can be seen in a number of stories and legends. Their sun deity requires sacrifices to maintain his strength and prevent the world from being enveloped in eternal night, while the god of rain is needed to be appeased to ensure plentiful rainfall for crops. These are just some examples. But at least we have an understanding of their motivations. If we travel east across the Atlantic, we can find remnants of human sacrifice in Europe, performed by ancient Celtic peoples. Such rituals were performed by druids, and it's said that they would build large effigies from wicker and place people inside, where they would then be set on fire as a method of paying tribute to the gods. It's also believed that they may have practiced in some form of ritual cannibalism. Now, there is some debate as to the prevalence of such sacrifices, as the Celts didn't really leave behind many written documents regarding their practices, and most accounts that we do have either come from the Romans or the Greeks, so the possibility of historical bias is high. Nonetheless, bodies have been discovered which indicate that the Celts did engage in some form of human sacrifice. One such discovery was the Lindo man, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, whose mummified remains were found in an English peat bog. The remains were very well preserved due to the conditions of the bog preventing bodily decay, and evidence indicates that the man had his throat slashed, was struck repeatedly in the head, and had been strangled with enough force to break his neck. Given how extravagant the man's death was, coupled with the fact that other bodies had also been discovered in the area, there might have been some truth to what the Romans had written about regarding Celtic practices. But again, due to the lack of written records, the motivation behind these sacrifices is yet unknown. Although, if I had to guess, I'd presume that their reasoning would be similar to the Aztecs in that these sacrifices were made to appeal local deities. Of course, ritual sacrifices weren't always performed to appease the gods. Some human sacrifices were performed as a funerary custom, such as in India, Egypt, and Scandinavia. Typically, the widow of the deceased may be killed in order for them to join their spouse in the afterlife. Such a ritual has been documented within Hinduism, referred to as sati, again, apologies for pronunciation, where a widow would immolate themselves upon their husband's funeral pyre. But it wasn't always just the spouse to the deceased. Servants, slaves, even concubines of highly regarded leaders could also be sacrificed so they could continue to serve their masters. Egyptian pharaohs had retainer sacrifices during the First Dynasty where servants and nobles were sacrificed and entombed with them, and prominent Vikings might have their thralls sacrificed in a similar fashion. Most of these customs are no longer practiced for rather obvious reasons. Even in history, these funerary rituals were short-lived and lasted only a few generations. Yet, that isn't to say that human sacrifices weren't still practiced in more modern times. One could argue that human sacrifices still continue to this day, and I'm not talking about secretive occult rituals performed by shady individuals. No, I mean ritual killings that were public, took place in broad daylight, and have been documented by participants and bystanders alike. They've even been discussed in schools and talked about on the news. You probably know about a few of them yourself. Now, due to the sheer number of these sacrifices, I couldn't possibly cover all of them, but I will back my claim by discussing what is most likely the well-known case of human sacrifice that occurred during the colonial period, from 1962 to 1963. I am, of course, referring to the Salem witch trials, which resulted in the execution of 20 people who were accused of witchcraft and colluding with the devil. Now, some of you might think that the witch trials don't qualify as human sacrifice, but really think about it. Human sacrifice is defined as the act of killing a human being as part of a ritual, often for the purpose of appeasing gods or spirits, and the practice of witchcraft was seen as unholy and classified as a form of heresy. They executed these individuals both out of concern for their communities and public welfare, but also because their god commanded them to. Exodus 22:18, do not allow a sorceress to live. The Puritans killed these people because they believed it to be God's will, that it was something they needed to do. Now, I may be arguing semantics, but that certainly sounds an awful lot like human sacrifice to me. As do the killings perpetuated by Adolfo Constanzo, a cult leader with a small following and connections to local cartels, who had killed and dismembered numerous people as part of his rituals. Then, of course, there was the Heaven's Gate incident, in which 39 members had committed suicide as part of a ritual which would allow them to evacuate Earth and transcend humanity. And I won't even bother listing the numerous honor killings that take place all over the world, as family members who are believed to have brought dishonor to their families for a plethora of different reasons are killed in order to preserve the family's honor. The definition of human sacrifice only involves the act of killing one or more human beings as part of a ritual, and each of these examples falls under that definition. Most people believe that human sacrifice was a wicked practice performed by barbaric peoples centuries ago, and that such practices are no longer performed in the modern world. But in reality, these rituals are much more prevalent than some folks would like to believe.